Of This Week with Sabir. In today's hot seat is Nima Gardideh. Let me tell you about him. Nima is the co-founder of Pearmill, a tech-powered growth studio that combines the power of artful creativity with precision targeting on major digital platforms. He's an expert in growth experimentation, organizational design, operating systems, agile software engineering, funnel optimization, and UX. And in today's topic, we will be talking about hyper growth in multi-sided marketplaces. But first of all, Nima, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before I get started, I know that we're going to talk a ton for the next hour. We're going to talk about hyper growth in multi-sided marketplaces. We'll learn more about what they are and stuff like that. But before I get started with those things, I always ask my guests to kind of acquaint me and the audience of who they are, their DNA, their journey, who they're just if you can tell us briefly, where besides your bio, everything that I didn't say in your bio, right? Where is your journey? Where did you come from, and how did you get here?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Iran up until I was 15 or so. Lived in Canada for about another 10. I started my professional journey as an engineer. Been sort of programming since I was 13 or so for fun, and then it became my career for a while. I got tired of engineering for a little bit and moved to product management for a few years in my career. And in the middle of that, I started my first company and then worked for some other folks. And this is technically my second company, even though we've gone through 2 iterations of it. So, you know who's counting. But my sort of background is kind of a combination of all these things that you talked about, right? Engineering coming together with product management and eventually leading to growing companies. And having been a repeat entrepreneur myself, I like to be a generalist. And it's kind of one of the things I find quite interesting about entrepreneurship is that I get to learn about all these different aspects of how to build businesses and grow them. And ultimately, my curiosity comes from economics and how societies function and do trade. So being in growth has been a gift for that, because we deal with lots of different types of companies and hundreds of millions of dollars, and being able to observe and learn about these different business models and how they're interacting with people and businesses has been really cool and interesting.
You just mentioned, it occurred to me that you're a two-time immigrant, right? From Iran,
Yeah.
From Iran to Canada. That's a migration, right? That's a huge migration. And then you took a back door to United States as a second migration, right? In
Yeah.
Canada, where did you land? In Toronto?
Yeah, we were in Toronto for the first few years. So I did some of high school, all my high school career there, and then I started going to college at University of Toronto. Dropped that to start my first company. When that didn't work, after about 2 years or so, I moved to Montreal to work for an e-commerce company called Frank and Oak. They're actually still alive. I think they were recently sold to a
I
PE
know
fund.
them. I think I may know them. Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah. It was a menswear and now a just general fashion brand. They were one of the first sort of vertically integrated plays. Everlane was quite big in the US, and Frank and Oak was like the Canadian, more design forward version of them. I was really quite into it. And that was actually my first time recognizing that I like operations, because I helped launch about 7 of the stores there, even though I originally joined as a product manager for their mobile apps, and learned how interesting it is to try to design a process and get people to execute in a seamless way and in a repeatable way. And that was quite fun. But my immigration to the US was my first personal immigration. I think the first one was primarily led by my parents. And they did ask us if we wanted to go to Canada or Germany. And I chose Canada, and I was very happy that they chose Canada, in the hopes that I would at some point move to New York, which is where I am now. But I did spend a few years in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. Just as you do when you're in tech, you do your time. It's like the army. You do your time in the valley, and then you do what you want afterwards. And now I'm in New York. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. We were just talking about how I don't have an American passport, and I should really start considering it. It's been 8 years or 9 years or something I've been living in this country. So
It makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, since you're now situated more and more here, it makes sense to go for that. It's definitely
mhm.
has its benefits. So now you started Pearmill. Did you start Pearmill in Canada, or did you start it here in the US?
Yeah, so at this point, it was in the Bay Area already, and so Pearmill kind of it was started outside of another failed experiment of ours. So me and my co-founder had started this consumer reports for the next generation sort of company. So you could text this phone number, you would get the best product recommendations via SMS. And we were actually quite good at scaling that business, but it was a very hard business in that the operations were always net negative, and we had very bad unit economics. So as we were running out of money, and this was like a YC fellowship company, as we were running out of money, we had discussed that we would want to continue working together even if this thing dies. And then so we started consulting, just helping out other friends of ours who were building businesses. And I did some engineering work. My co-founder Kareem did some marketing work. And when we start spending money for other people on these sort of digital ad channels, I got intrigued. I was like, this is interesting. It's recurring. People are spending all the time. And one of the things that I always thought was interesting in the ecosystem of technology is growth and growing companies, specifically around how to systematize them, how to do them very fast, and then how organizational design gets into the equation there. And when we start doing this work, I got more and more excited about it, and both of us realized that we could build a company here using our background. So can we introduce technology into the growth stack in a way that helps companies scale? And can we learn through this company how to systematize growth in general? So we added a third co-founder at that point to help us on the creative side, because as you probably know, Facebook and these social channels, creative is one of the most important levers you have access to. And then we started building Pearmill. And this was in New York at this point where we decided to actually build this thing. Was about 3 years ago, end of 2019. We decided to build it, the three of us, to start scaling it up. And now, we're almost just under 40 people or something like that.
Wow.
And
Congratulations
out of 12
on the
countries.
growth.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of work, when you're
Yeah.
growing a company, raising it. It's like, in my case, I do that for several of the brands I own, but I also do it on consulting basis to other, businesses too, and help them grow too. So I can imagine like how difficult it is, especially growing from, let's say, 0 to 3 co-founders to 40 people, across 12 different nations, So that's just coordination, operations, everything is so challenging while you're delivering the service that you need to deliver.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I've come to the sort of realization that I think doubling, it's not easy, but it's doable. Anything over doubling is basically hell. And we, one of the years we did like 4x or something like that, and that was just so hard. I slept very little, I would say, and it wasn't even the sleep. It was just how painful it was for everyone and how confused people are, because you don't have the right processes in place yet. And what is this like phrase Reid Hoffman uses of you're kind of like building the airplane you're building the parachute as you've jumped
Falling.
off a plane.
Yeah.
And people feel that you're like, oh my God, I don't know how this is going to work. Are we going to continue making money? And we have no investors. So it's another problem of like cash flow management and how do you make that type of stuff work. In the early days, that was hard. Now we have a pretty strong muscle for that. But it's all interesting, but hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a better, Nima, I'm going to give you a better analogy. And this is what I use with all growth scenarios. What I say is like you're driving from New York to Florida on I-95, and we're driving an 18-wheeler. There is a flat tire, but we cannot stop to change the flat tire. You have to get back there and change the tire while we're barreling down, right? Because if you stop, we're gonna lose our momentum. We have to keep on driving, but to go back there and change the tire, you know. So,
Yeah,
so that's a better analogy
that I
of
relate to that
growth,
a
in my
lot. Yeah,
opinion.
there is so much to say about momentum, and I think like what is the Reforge Brian Balfour way of they use the word motion, right? Are you building a sales motion, a growth motion, and all these sort of things for a reason? I think there is like a lot of wisdom behind that word itself when they use it in how they abstract these ideas, because the momentum is so important. Yeah.
Oh, it is. I mean, with growth, and the more momentum you have, the more learning you're getting, and you're learning what's successful and works, so that you could scale it quickly. And then you also learn what's not working, and you have to park your ego and just go and make the change. Just make the change the parameters, change the test case, so that you can just succeed with it. If you stick by it too much because Nima came up with the idea and it should work, believe me, you're gonna
Oh
you're
my
gonna
God.
burn through a lot of
Yeah.
money while you're feeding your ego.
It's fortunate that I think I joke around a lot with my co-founders around our first sets of jobs as people when I started my first companies. That was technically my first official job, but after that I worked with other people, and the way I always thought about it is I'm getting to learn on other people's dime. I'm
Mhm.
getting to screw up a lot and learn, and I'm quite grateful for those first people that I reported to who took a chance on this like young but ambitious kid. And I've since done that to some folks that we work with, and um, yeah, it's an interesting thing to look back at, and I'm learning all the time, and hopefully the failures are less dramatic compared to back then. But yeah, it's a big part of the process.
Yeah. So let's jump into the topic now, right? What are multi-sided marketplaces?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite types of businesses. So effectively, the way I would define that is if you are providing a service where you are connecting multiple parties to transact together, that's the way I would define a multi-sided marketplace, right? It could be as simple as Craigslist, right? So that's probably the most obvious example. There is a company, Craigslist, that's one actor providing a service, which is a listings product, to many different forms of people who are providing services and then also consuming those services. So they are like one of the most complex multi-sided marketplaces out there because they have all these sorts of sub-markets that they're in. But a more maybe simple example is one of our clients is, for instance, they're named Sonder. They're a distributed hotel. But actually what they do is they have consumers that come in that want to stay in hotels. And then on the other side, they go and buy hotels and rent out places. And then they're able to sort of give this service out. So they are a managed marketplace in my mind because they're effectively managing a slew of inventory, which is their hotels and hotel rooms across many properties, and giving that service to people. So it can be as like simple as that, or as abstract or complex as something like Craigslist to me.
Good. So what would you say marketplaces, in my perspective, like from an e-commerce perspective, places like Amazon and eBay, right? And now Walmart has gotten into the game too. What would you consider those kind of marketplaces?
Yeah, those are more like they're definitely marketplaces. There's usually in my head those are two-sided marketplaces. So that makes sense as well. So there is like a player like Amazon or Walmart who has a relationship with the customer, and then they open up the other side, which is the supply side of their business, saying you can, as a merchant, come in and sell products on there. And so you're the other side, you're the supply side of that business, but effectively there is really one demand side. And they're also an actor on the supply side themselves, right? So they're selling their own products as well as letting other people come in, which I'm sure you know is a very big issue and a controversial issue in making the laws in this country around these businesses that aggregate demand on one side and then take advantage of that aggregation by participating in the supply. Craigslist is not coming around and saying, you know what, we're going to actually deploy our own nannies or handymen and home cleaners or whatever different services that you can get on Craigslist. They're just effectively a connector. Amazon and Walmart and these businesses are doing both. They're both a connector of these businesses, but also they're a participant in the supply of their demand and supply marketplace.
No, but the absence of that with Craigslist, right? I mean, I've been around for a long time with especially with like web apps and all social media and so on and so forth. I think in the absence of the fact that since Craigslist was not providing that, then you had companies like Angie's List or Angie, now it's like rebranded to Angie, come about, or HomeAdvisor.com, where they actually say that, oh, we're a marketplace where you can have, or Care.com, you can have access to nannies, right? And they're vetted, they're background checked, and all of that kind of stuff. And then mom and dads, if you need any kind of a nanny service or babysitting service or tutoring service, you can come to care.com and you could get that from them, because Craigslist was not providing it. And Craigslist has gone through quite a lot of controversy also over the past since its existence, because of not policing it, because of not vetting and creating this next tier, because some consumers actually look for that, right? I mean, when you don't do that and you don't have that blue check, kind of a program that says that, oh, this is a vetted service provider, this is a vetted, or this is a consumer with a high rating because they tip well, they pay on time, and all those kinds of things. Then somebody else comes in and says, oh, you know what, Craigslist is not going to do that. We will be Craigslist, but better with a blue check, because we will be checking those things on the supply side, on the demand side.
Yeah, there are basically trade-offs with these types of things, right? So your Craigslist, the trade-off you're willing to give up is on the sort of depth you have on each of these markets, right? So they're not going to have the best. If you're looking for care, you're not going to get the best experience there, but they have breadth because of it, right? So you can literally find anything on there. Where you go to care.com or any of these decoupling versions of these businesses. As a consumer, you're going to have a better experience. But the downside is, of course, you can't be as big as Craigslist when it comes to different services you provide. And then there is also, you're aggregating demand around one of these areas. And hopefully there is actually, so I think that the future is to build Craigslist and then decouple it as much as possible.
And niche down.
Yeah, niche down, because then you're going to end up, first of all, just more transactions is good for the economy. It was one of the things I truly believe in. And the other part is that you're just going to have better experience for the end user and the supply side of the business. So as a, let's say, care provider, I can maybe get insurance all of a sudden because I'm part of this company. I can not have to care about my own marketing because this company is doing it for me and all this sort of stuff. And I can tap into that infrastructure. So there's a lot of positives there, and theoretically there's enough demand in all of these things that there will be multiple players. So that as a care provider, I have optionality. Because the thing that always scares me with these decoupling models is, am I going to have optionality on the supply side of the market, or am I going to get taken advantage of? You'll see things like Uber and Lyft happening to cities where the cities mostly have had to legislate. Right, because the markets are so concentrated, you're going to have one or two players, right? So almost every major city is a duopoly when it comes to rideshare, and it's Lyft and Uber or one other player. And the city had to legislate to make sure that the supply side of their businesses are taken care of correctly and they're getting paid well and all this sort of stuff. Because consumers, they're willing to pay basically like as low as possible to get rides. And if you just put drivers and riders on a uncontrolled auction of rides, consumers will just drive them down to the basically the price of gas, right? So you do need some legislation when there's not enough competition for the drivers, and that's what happened there. But hopefully in these other markets that are way bigger, you won't have issues like that. But I do think as a customer, I want the verticalized ones. It's just way better. I get the reviews, I get the blue check mark like you just talked about, and you can trust these services businesses to care about the ultimate experience way more than that Craigslist will ever do, right?
I mean, one thing that I've noticed with marketplaces and multi-sided marketplaces is that they create over their evolution, right? Over their 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years into existence, right, or more now, right? They create the an ecosystem where there are not just a select few actors that you see, right? The consumer, the service, like in case of Uber, right? You have the people who take the ride, and there are people who provide the ride, right? But that's not just Uber. I mean, that's just one aspect of Uber, the ride part of it. And they did extend it out to Uber Eats, where they work with the restaurants too. Now that's another type of delivery. Not You're not delivering human beings from point A to point B. You're delivering food or merch from point A to point B, right? But I also see, like, especially in case of Uber, I see that there are providers that actually buy up transport, and then they hire people to actually drive those rides. And there's a banking element also in it, that if you cannot afford to, they will give you everything, the Uber package. That, let's say, if I own 7 cars, I cannot drive 7 cars at the same time, or I may not want to drive any of the cars. I might hire 7 college students, and they buy up a some sort of a package from me, for like almost like a franchise, and then they drive, and then as much as they drive, I'll give them, like, I don't know, 40% of the pays or something like that,
Yeah.
with not much risk on their end, because they don't have to put up the money to get a car. They don't have to get any of the other stuff that's needed for the care of that car and transport and stuff like that. And I'm making money also.
Yeah, there's like an interesting thing that's happening there, right? I really like that a lot, because basically what's happened there, and it happens in all these marketplaces, like Airbnb has a very similar dynamic. I'm sure you've seen it.
eBay
And
was one of the first ones to do it. With
yeah,
stores you could go to, you don't have to pack anything. You can just literally bring your merch that you sold. They will pack it for you. They do
they'll do it.
everything,
Yeah.
and you would just send it out. Yeah.
And Amazon has it to some extent, right? There are like professional sellers now. You just provide them the product, and they start selling it for you. Or, even businesses like us will grab your operations and we'll scale it up, because we know how to do it on these platforms, right? So basically, what's happening there is they're creating a micro economy that's highly predictable, right? So when you have a supply side of an economy, or a system like that, it's very, very predictable, because I know, let's say if I'm a debt provider, which is effectively what those businesses are, the people that are giving you the car and hiring you on a salary and all this sort of stuff, so then you can ride Uber rides, right? They're actually just using a debt instrument to buy cars and all this sort of stuff, insurance, just protection, all this sort of stuff for you, and then hire you as an employee. And the reason that works is because they have predictability on the market. They know that they can expect rides from Uber or Uber Eats or DoorDash. They go across all these different platforms that are effectively in the same market, which is just ride sharing and using cars to get paid. And so because they have predictability, they can really build businesses around them, right? And then same with Airbnb. They have these like host models where you can put your place up, and there's other hosts that will come and make sure your place is clean and like well set up and making money for you. It's effectively like a distributed version of a property management company.
I was about to say
that used to exist before, but now they're doing it at the Airbnb level, and so you can tap in these professionally managed Airbnb host teams that will come and maintain your whole Airbnb for you, and effectively make sure that you're making some money from your property. And the reason that can happen is the same thing. There's predictability on demand, because Airbnb is doing the work at concentrating that demand. So your only sort of risk as a business is operations. And so you can then go and just have excellence when it comes to ops and make a decent living doing it, right? So it's like the old school way of these things were the McDonald's franchises and the Starbucks franchises and the Subway franchises of the world. Now you're seeing like that version happening to these online businesses that there's predictability around, and they have to maintain their revenues. These guys are public companies, right? These companies are in the public markets. They have to keep hitting their goals. So so long as the city is there you're going to get rides. And so long as the city's there, you're going to get Airbnb guests and make money. So I've met with some folks that have like very sophisticated um, models, like predictive models, even on these things, because they have so many properties that like sort of they co-manage with the actual Airbnb hosts and stuff. So they know exactly what zip codes they would get into and how much money they would make if they went into those zip codes. And it's like a mini economy. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I was actually recently watching a Netflix show. It was introduced maybe a couple of weeks ago. It was one of the format was like a Shark Tank format, but it was with
Mm-hmm.
real estate developers and builders and investors, and it was the
Mm-hmm.
same format, like five people, sitting there, and homeowners would come and pitch them. And one of the biggest questions that typically is this property, can I use it as a rental property, as an Airbnb, right? Because some places do not allow you to do that,
Yep.
so I was actually watching that, and almost it was formulaic. Like every person that walked in, can I rent it? Does it have the legs to? Is it a multi-family, for example? Can I take it and break it up into like three families, or I can rent three units, three different units and stuff like that. So, and when we are talking about these ecosystems, the ecosystems are not just related to the different actors that are playing a role in that. There are entertainment aspect of it also, like Netflix special that
Yeah.
it also happens on the back end of it, and it's not just directly related to that ecosystem.
Yeah, whenever there's a way to make money, there will be also like 20 pundits talking about how they know exactly how to make money in that way, right? It's quite fun to observe sometimes.
So let me talk about a very simple marketing scheme, right? When you have, you set up your Shopify store, you buy a bunch of custom socks because you make cute graphics, and that's what you want to have as your business, and you put it up. And then the very next natural thing you do after the site is up and it's branded and looks good, you go on Facebook and Google, you buy ads, you do search engine optimization, you post on social, you drum up some business, people come to you, they buy from you, and then you fulfill those orders, right? Now, with
Mm-hmm.
a multi-sided marketplace, it's not as simple as that. It's not like you, as a business owner, just going and getting the consumers to come and buy from you. You're trying to solve a very complicated question, right? One, you need service providers on one end, right? Whatever that solution is that you're providing in your multi-sided marketplace, you have to bring the service providers, and they have to be really good, especially when you're launching. You have to bring the consumers in who would utilize those services so that you can connect those two people together, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then provide your platform needs to provide the experience and credibility for them to keep on coming back. Like care.com keeps on bringing the moms and dads back because they provide nanny services, and you might get a nanny who you may not like because of personality, or how she handles your kids, and you may want to switch it out and get another one, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
well, what are your thoughts on that? What does that framework look like when, let's say, we built this magical marketplace, right? You and I built it, and we're going to be doing we'll be selling some sort of a service, and those service providers are going to provide some sort of a service to consumers, right? Or it could be other businesses too. How do we get all these actors to come to this brand new site that has zero traffic?
Yeah. This is like the number one problem in this area, right? So that I think the famous phrase people use here is the chicken and egg problem. You need both of them to be present at the same time for it to work. And the more,
No, no,
let's
here
say,
you
like,
need a heat lamp too, not just the
you need
chicken and
all
the egg. You need
yeah.
to have a heat lamp, and you need to have a safe place for it to lay an egg, because
Yeah,
you have
the
none of those.
level of serendipity is got to be high, right? So the way people think about this general area of problem is effectively they call it marketplace liquidity, right? And really what that means is that if you are bringing someone in from the demand side of this marketplace, so let's say care.com, you're a parent, you decided that you want a nanny, you land on care.com. If there are no nannies willing to give you the service at the right price, you're going to effectively bounce and not be part of you will not be a customer of care.com, right? So you're going to bounce. And so that's a big problem. So you need at any given point enough supply in your marketplace, so then people can transact. And vice versa, this is an interesting problem where you need to be able to retain the supply by having enough demand available at all times, right? So if I am a care provider in the scenario of care.com and I want to be providing care for children, if I'm going and signing up for this thing and I'm not getting enough business, I'm just going to go find another path to finding business and or maybe even change jobs, right? So there is a big problem there. So both of these sides, they have to have enough pull. So and it gets a little bit more complicated. It's not just at an abstract level, someone looking for care and someone providing for care. It's someone looking for care in this specific set of zip codes and someone providing care in this specific set of zip codes, and then probably 10 more vectors of judgment and filtering, right? Are they, certain age? Do they have this background? Whatever, what I'm looking for as a parent, and vice versa. Maybe as a care provider, I'm looking to only work with children below 5, right? And your child is 10 years old.
You cannot provide nanny services through Zoom, I guess.
Yeah, or that,
Not
right?
yet.
You can't do that. Definitely not. And so there is many vectors that you have to have liquidity on. And so what ends up happening as a massive growth problem is how do you provide liquidity and all these different vectors? And so the answer is actually quite hard in that I've been working in this general area for quite a few years, and every company solved it in a slightly different way. And so, some examples are they will go and hire one side of the marketplace full time. So we have a couple healthcare clients that are effectively doing providing care online, and they will go and hire doctors full time who will sit in an office. They will not have that much work to do at first until they figure out the demand side of the business and then max out their capacity, and then open up an actual marketplace where doctors can provide their time, right? So there's an example where you have capital, and this is if you've raised money and hopefully you have enough money to do these types of things. You go and basically take on one side of the risk yourself. You will say, I will take the risk on the supply side of this business for now until I can open it up, and then you focus solely on the demand side, then you try to solve the demand side, right? Another path is you kind of build up demand, but not release it. So let's talk about the Uber model. They do a lot of marketing before they launch in a city. So they rack up demand. So the moment they release the app and they open it up in a city, there is just enough demand coming in where there is drivers can be interested. And on the supply side, they do some of what I just talked about. They do pay people a little bit ahead of time and train them ahead of time and have them in there, and they test them with their own employees and do fake rides. But there is a playbook built then there where they launch in such a big way that all of a sudden they pass the threshold where the liquidity is there enough for the marketplace to then start organically maintaining itself to some extent. And they constantly obviously maintain these things and try to do a better job, but they've built very strong processes to be able to get to this level of liquidity as fast as possible. And theirs is much simpler in a sense. There was a geographical area, you want rides from A to B. It's very clear. We have businesses where based on your license as a doctor, you fall into a different threshold of liquidity for each zip code. So it becomes quite complex for some of these businesses where you have to have liquidity in these small filters of needs, and you have to figure out how to service those, and then build predictive models and figuring out which ones you have to service next, and then you build the whole growth process around how do I unlock more and more liquidity in this quite complex marketplace. But that is a general space. I would say it's this is why these businesses are very hard to build, but when they're built, they're very, very strong and have a massive moat, is because it's very hard to get started. The hard start problem in these things is so hard that it takes a lot of capital usually. It takes a lot of know-how on how to think about these things, and also excellent execution, both on the supply side and the demand side of these businesses. And then if you screw up either side, people might not come back, or because you can piss off a whole community of people. I've known founders who've pissed off a whole community of care providers, and it's in the ecosystem that it should not work with that company anymore because they just didn't do a good job providing the right amount of demand or the right insurance or the right form of communication, whatever it was, and then it is in the ecosystem that you should not work with this specific company, right? And that is the worst thing you can get. You're basically dead at that point, right? So it's a very hard type of business, but it's quite intellectually interesting to think about these things.
I mean, some ecosystems of or networks of professionals like that. Like, let's say if it's chiropractors, a lot of them know each other, right?
Yeah.
If it's doctors, they meet at conferences, they know each other and know each other's capabilities and stuff. And you open your mouth and you say, "Oh, I'm working with Sabir's magical medical.com," right? And they go like, "Oh, no, don't work with him.
Yep.
He's it doesn't pay on time, very poor service, and even the targeting of the right patients is not the right one." And it has been many embarrassing situations with him. Boom, you're dead. You're dead
dead
on arrival.
Yeah, and it's always a good reminder that in these types of businesses, you have multiple customers effectively as a business. You have the supply is your customer to some extent. So is the demand side of these marketplaces. They're all your customer, and you need to really take care of them.
Yeah. I was actually, while you were talking, something was going through my mind. Like, would you consider LinkedIn to be a multi-sided marketplace?
I think LinkedIn is a pretty good example, actually, because they have, that's a very complex one because it's more of a network than it is a marketplace, right? And there are very similar dynamics, right? You have to have, they have this problem. It's very similar to liquidity, which is you need to have a functioning atomic unit of the product, right? So you have to have enough people connected to each other at a micro level for them to be engaged. And then you have these other people that care about that self-sustaining network, which is their marketplace part, right? There's advertisers, there's recruiters, there's salespeople that want access to the network, but ultimately their first and foremost product is to people to be able to connect, to be able to display their professional journey. And if they're not doing that, none of the other stuff works. So they're a little bit of a different play because it's more of a social network, obviously, and they have more network dynamics or network effect dynamics as a business than they do marketplace dynamics. And the network effect dynamics effectively solve a lot of liquidity problems in their so let's say ad marketplace or recruiting marketplace. But very similarly, they do have these goals. For instance, that hey, we want to open up or have more liquidity in the recruiting market for, let's say, doctors in X market. And then all of a sudden, their social team starts trying to acquire more doctors to be active in that city or in that geo, and get more of them to create LinkedIn accounts, and they grow like that. So it's very similar in that they do think about liquidity in that way, but really what they have to have is network effects within these micro communities. It's a very interesting business.
Nima, the example you used earlier when we were discussing Craigslist and Angie's List, right? Craigslist is a listing service. Angie's List actually provides the services and connects the two sites together, right? Do you believe that, like, in case of LinkedIn, it's LinkedIn, and on the other side of it could be Fiverr or Upwork? Like, they could have done that, but you literally have access to professionals. You have the platform. You have billions of people who signed up to let people know that you're ready to work, right? But then you have to message them and you have to do those kinds of things on LinkedIn, versus Fiverr became a marketplace where you would go in and find, you have a need as a business owner, and then you post that need, and then you get proposals from service providers, and Fiverr actually provides that platform for you.
Yeah, I think that comparison is very good, Craigslist versus Angie, because Craigslist is the sort of like more abstracted version of Angie, where they're not really taking care of, they're not caring much about the connection. They're just going broad and providing more ad services and things like that to make money. And LinkedIn kind of falls within the same category of we're just going broad. They have millions and millions of users, and they're providing a free service effectively for connection, but there is a ad/recruiting business model there, where Fiverr has grabbed one of these, or had now many of these verticals actually, I guess, and created the Angie version of them. And you'll see, like, there's companies like Dribble and I'm blanking on more, but Dribble is another example of doing it, the same thing, where people are coming with their professional journey. Upwork, thank you. Coming in with their professional resume, but looking for services work. LinkedIn is adding more than that, right? There's like venture capitalists doing work on LinkedIn, all the way to the service provider. So the range is bigger. And in order to be able to address that whole larger market of professionals, they can't do what Fiverr is doing, because a PE manager, private equity manager, is not going to go on Fiverr and create an account, but they would on LinkedIn, because that's what they're going to connect to other fellow PEs or founders of companies that they're trying to buy, or so on and so forth. So there is a larger market of professionals that LinkedIn is going after, but Fiverr's grabbed one slice of that, which is services and consulting, and created a much better business for that specific use case that also exists in LinkedIn, because they are the larger sort of player, but they're never going to be as good as Fiverr for that. Just like how Fiverr will never be as good as of a professional networking tool than LinkedIn would be, right? So in my head, it's more of like a trade-off as a product, like which one of these you want to be, and both have like positives and provide different value in the market, I think.
So you are struggling along. You're very happy. You're Uber, right? You're growing your business. It's multi-billion dollars now, right? And then the pandemic hits, right? Now you're screwed on the supply side. You're screwed on the demand side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs to sit at home. They cannot go outside, right? There is a moratorium on driving. You're not allowed to go outside to drive or do anything. You and I are both in New York. You remember how bad it got in New York during COVID, right? What do you do as a company, as a marketplace, when it gets to something like that? Where
that's
your drivers
one.
cannot drive, and your demand side, your consumers don't need to go anywhere because they're home. They can't go anywhere.
This is an interesting, obviously that was a very tough time. Marketplaces turned out that were in an interesting advantage, actually, because they didn't have any fixed costs associated to their businesses. Some of them did, and I have an example I'll walk you through just
human
now.
Resources, like every one of them had a lot of employees, and buildings they were in.
Yeah, for sure. There were all these like sort of businesses attached to Uber that probably went bankrupt and had a lot of issues. And in that time, I think the answer was to find a way to be relevant and in service of the issue that we were facing, which was COVID, right? So the example I have here, and Uber did a lot of this, where they were trying to figure out how to move doctors and nurses that needed to be moved in a safe way to and from these hospitals and to hotels and all these places to isolate them, right? And we had a business we were working with at the time as well, called Sonder. I mentioned them earlier. They're a distributed hotel, and so they shifted their whole business, and they did have fixed costs because they leased these buildings and they own some properties, and so it was their demand side effectively went to zero, but they had the supply side they were paying for. So their business was at an existential crisis, effectively, right when this stuff hit, and we worked with them to completely shift their business to that exact market. So they were helping doctors and nurses stay away from their families when they were at risk, but then still stay in these nice places. And then they were giving them away at cost. Literally, all they wanted was to just be able to not have to pay the lease and lose money on it. So they were just giving these things at very close to cost to help those people out for the first few months. And then eventually there was some sort of staycation mentality for people who were just tired of being in the same space and place after a few months, and wanted to literally in the same city go down 4 blocks and live in a different environment. So then there was like that market. So as the pandemic was going on, they found different ways to service folks. And so because you have a supply and or a demand of a marketplace, you can shift one side of it, right? So in this case, they shifted the demand side because they had access to supply to effectively have a totally different business for a while. Now they're back to their normal operations, but for those like 6 to 8 months in the middle, we were sitting in a room talking about what is happening right now in the news, what is going on, what can we do to help, and they succeeded, right? They had 85% occupancy a month in after we started helping them, right after the shutdowns, and they stayed afloat, and they IPO'd during the pandemic, which is crazy. So it was one of the most interesting problems for us to deal with because it wasn't as simple as Uber. At least at the Uber company level, they were fine because they had no costs associated to these things. Of course, the businesses that were expecting what we just talked about, the sort of consistency of demand, they had issues dealing with that. But Uber itself didn't have a lot of issues because their costs are not fixed in each of the markets they're in. They're very low fixed costs. But Sandra, on the other hand, didn't. So we really had to change their business model for a 6-month period to help them survive. Everyone on that team, I'm super proud of what they did, and they're just quite good at just thinking about the problem from scratch and figuring out how to survive and help in the midst of it, which is wonderful.
No, I think in some scenarios when you are kind of cornered and you can come up with something interesting, you might find out and explore a completely new business model that you didn't even realize existed.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I think COVID opened up those kind of opportunities, and if you were smart about it, you identified it, you leveraged it, and then you have another way of delivering. I'll give you an example. For example, a lot of fashion companies, when COVID hit, they couldn't do their fashion shows. They could not do their runway shows. Everything was canceled because New York or Milan, both of them were complete lockdown. Right? That's the two meccas of fashion. Right? And you couldn't do it. So a lot of fashion companies started doing virtual fashion shows, and the models were completely safe, meaning that they were in a green room, and they would just do their walk and then exit, and then the next person would come in, and they created a whole environment, virtual environment around that fashion show and stuff like that. Now I think that's going to become a table stake for fashion companies, because now you could do that, and your the people around the world can watch your show live, that they couldn't come to New York or Milan or LA or something like that, wherever you were having a fashion show, they cannot come there. But now you could still deliver that experience virtually. That it's not specific to it's just Zooming. Now you know how to conduct and showcase your situation. I think in multi-sided marketplaces also, identifying those kind of services that you would not even think about because you were so embedded in the physical aspect of the marketplace that you don't think about the virtual side of, or maybe even more providing more services that you could provide to either the supply side or the demand side.
Yeah, and that's an interesting sort of general concept of sort of constrained creativity, right? You're blocked, you can't do the thing that you usually did, and you're constrained with COVID in this scenario, and then people's creativity flourished in all these different and interesting ways, and it was a sight to see for sure. And the fashion companies, most of them gone back to the physical shows, which is interesting to see. But
no, they're zoomed out. That's why.
They literally zoomed out. I actually was just in Paris for some of them, and they're still at it. There's so much beauty, but there's so much waste there as well. So I did like the virtual stuff that we're doing a lot during COVID.
Yeah, when it comes to other types of challenges, when you have, even though I don't want to reduce the seriousness of what's going on in Ukraine, for example, right, and the disruption that has caused, and now it's like major powers in the world fighting against each other. And when you have a multi-sided marketplace, like whether you're running eBay or you're running your little Shopify store, but you're drop shipping from China, and now China decides that, you know what, there will be sanctions against US, right? And now your drop shipping business that depended on Alibaba or AliExpress, now you're suffering from it. Or oil is not, the pipelines are shut down, and you cannot deliver heat, and you're a service provider, right? Or you could be a marketplace of service provider that distributes oil and oil heating services and stuff like that in Europe. What are your thoughts on that? Like when you are faced with those kinds of like major changes, like major issues like that that are down the line that you don't think is going to impact you, but ends up impacting you. Pandemic impacted every human being, all 7 billion of us, you know. But when it comes to these kind of wars, some of them are very regional they end up impacting a whole bunch of people that don't think that they have anything to do with with the Ukraine war.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I think that I'm not going to act like I think I know what the answers are here. The way I've been thinking about this, so I'm an entrepreneur. I run a business. We hire close to 40 people, and we have Ukrainians on staff. We actually have Russians on staff that no longer live in Russia. All of them have moved to different countries. And the way we've been thinking about this just general problem is effectively a series of risk management processes. So, let's go through the supply chain, right? So for us, it's very simple. There's a talent on the different sides of our company. So design, engineering, marketing, operations is very simple for us. It's effectively talent. And then on the other side of our business is the types of clients we're able to work with. Are they recession proof? Do they have geopolitical risk attached to their businesses? Do they have any sort of legislative risk? For instance, a lot of these healthcare companies are using laws that were passed for COVID, during COVID. And so how do we think about managing that risk? And so you can manage risk in all sorts of ways. For our people, we manage risk by effectively assuming that they may have to be underrun for many months of the year. And so the way we think about that is we have excess capital saved. So then we can continue paying them, but then replace them whilst they're trying to find their new home, right? This has actually happened to us twice already. And we've been able to maintain our relationships with the people that we've worked with over the years. And I'm quite proud and grateful for the work they've done. And I will continue being helpful in that way. And on the client side for us, it's very clear. Here is the 6-7 businesses that are not so recession proof or have all these sorts of risks attached to their business. Okay, how do we de-risk that part of our portfolio? It's much easier because then we just go and add more clients in an area against their area, for instance, and we hedge them and all this sort of stuff. So there's that part is way easier because it's more of a portfolio management problem. The talent part is much harder for us. But if you're a business that has this problem on the supply chain side, right? So if you're like buying stuff from Alibaba, then you have to have the same thought process. How do you de-risk your supply chain? And it's easier said than done, but you got to do it from scratch. Go source products from other parts of the world and have a thought process at the very least that what you would do if it was cut off. Best case scenario, though, you start actually diversifying your supply and start buying from all these different places. So then you're ready to shift your supply chain mix. And this is actually what some of these bigger companies do, right? They have some level of supply chain mix, and they can play with it as geopolitics changes. There are some of them that are locked in, right? So like Apple has a massive geopolitical risk. They can't really do much about it. They've been trying to do something about it for the last few years, but every iPhone is still being made over there. And it's a problem for US American sort of exceptionalism in some ways. So there's issues there. But as a small business, you almost always have the ability to diversify. And if not, go invest in it. So I had a friend that recently convinced a factory owner to start building the products that she was producing in a different part of the world. because she's trying to de-risk her business. Right? So it's very interesting to see that even if it doesn't exist, there are other people who want to transact in this economy, who are willing to take risks with you just as much as you're willing to take risks with them. So, go out there and hustle your way out of this thing. And the last thing I'll say about this is, there's also a recession on top of all this sort of geopolitical risk. They're obviously interconnected. The name of the game now is, and I also have a podcast, and I ask this question over and over again right now. And I had an economist or ex-economist who's now a founder on the podcast, who was talking about how the power of just holding onto cash right now, as you're going through the next few months and probably 2 years, and being a lot more frugal with it, is going to be there. And my point of view on growth in this, let's say 12 to 18 months from now, who knows how long this is going to last, is that unless you're at massive scale and you've saturated your market, there's always space for growth. It's not like the economy is going away. It's just not growing as much as it usually does, and it's going to shrink and contract a handful of percentage points. But it's still a multi-trillion-dollar economy. Mm-hmm. It's functioning. So unless you're already making $80-90 billion a year, I'm pretty sure there is growth out there for you. There are customers there you can work with. There are businesses that want your services. You just need to go find them. It might be a little bit harder to find them because there's more competition in the market, but they're still there. And you just need to make sure that you're differentiated and you're doing a good job in providing the right service and products to people, and you'll still exist after all this stuff. So I think people overestimate the impact of these things, and there is, like, if you think about it that way, it helps to recognize that if you work hard, you'll keep growing, even in this time and when the world is unstable.
It's interesting. Like, my perspective on that is, like, if you're a player in any of the, whether you're a multi-sided marketplace or you're a fashion a fashion shop, and or you can create a portfolio. It could give you an opportunity where, if your competitors are not, they're not, bless you.
It didn't come.
If they, that's why I preempted it. That's why it stops when I do that. So if they're not investing in their company because they're afraid of inflation and recession, and they're suffering from, because they didn't invest in de-risking, right? Because you need to invest in that when you have a second supplier or a third supplier. Maybe they didn't do that. They didn't do their homework when they needed to do. You take care of the fire on your house, not when it's set on fire. You set smoke detectors, and you put fire extinguishers, and you put other types of things in place to make sure that's your insurance, that if there's fire, it's going to be put out. Not that the house is on fire and now you're trying to figure out the best way to put out the fire. That's not the way to do it. But if you are one of those unlucky people that didn't do their homework, right, and you're one of those, and you're the other party that did your homework, it could give you an opportunity to acquire a lot of competitors and become even have a more stronger hold on the market than you had before going into. So inflation could actually be, or recession could be, a very positive thing if you do the smart things about your business. Nima, I want to ask you, like, this is what I ask every guest: what is your number one $100,000 expert insight into, like, fueling that hyper growth? In your case specifically, what I would love to hear is, what are the best marketing channels for me to grow this whole ecosystem in my multi-sided marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, there is the obvious answers, I think, that we can talk about, like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and paid social and paid search are still the number one and two areas of investment. But the thing I would think a lot more about, and this is actually how our team thinks about how to choose channels, is walk through the customer's day and figure out where are they spending their time, how are they operating, and how are they living their lives, and figure out where you can fit into that journey in a way that is helpful and valuable for them. And it could be as simple as, we're in this market, there's a lot of people driving on these highways, so maybe we have to be on billboards, all the way to, it actually makes much more sense for us to write books about what we're doing, because the value is there for us to produce tons of very valuable content for them, because our sort of, let's say, market is highly intellectual, and when they convert, it's multiple millions of dollars for us, and it makes sense for us to spend the money writing, ghostwriting, 10 books a year. Who knows what the answer is, right? But the point of it is to really understand your customer and walk in their shoes, and then figure out how can you actually provide the best amount of value to them, where they are and when they're there, and start building a relationship with them. That's really what marketing is the beginning of a relationship with a customer.
Well, Nima, thank you for being on the show and dropping all this knowledge related to multi-sided marketplaces and all the other topics that we covered. We covered some other topics that were generally related to businesses, especially pandemic, inflation, recession, wars, and stuff like that. So thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. This is super fun. Thanks again.
And thank you, for audience, for tuning in. We have a lot more very interesting and top-level experts coming on the show on This Week with Sabir. So please join us next week, at same time, same place, on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook Live. You can check us out on any of the channels of preference, and we also distribute this through audio podcasts, all of the popular platforms. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you